Yeah, that seems to be the running theme. It's like if you see people complaining about the price, then it's going to just sell out.
What they're complaining about is that they're sad that they're definitely going to be spending that much money on it.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 523 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is May 30th, 2020 vibes. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity on this show. We'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your monthly donations to help keep the podcast going. There's a lot of stuff going on in the industry, in the studio. We're going to try to get through it somewhat quickly so we can maybe get to some questions this episode.
Let's go.
Let's do it. So first of all, in the studio, we've had a little bit of a shuffle.
A bit of a shakeup.
Shortly after we started working on Crashlands 2, we realized that this game was going to be too fucking big. And so we needed more time on the development side to just dedicate into the programming and systems development without the administrative overhead. And Adam had the time to kind of offload some of the admin too. So Adam became the CEO of the studio in 2021, I think it was.
I think it was 2020, actually. I think it was
2020.
Yeah.
Like pretty soon after we started working on Crashlands 2.
Yep.
Which was formerly my role. So over the 4.5 years of Crashlands 2's development, then Adam was handling all the administrative stuff and we call it biz dev, business development. In other words, sort of like reaching out to other partners and platforms and trying to find opportunities to bring the game to different places or get business deals or like whatever the case may be, as well as like a lot of the admin behind handling localization and marketing and all this stuff, right?
And then technically there's team management also. Yeah.
Team management. And there's a ton of administration that goes into running even a 8 or 9 person studio like we are. Normally Adam's role was more on like the sort of engineering. He was the CTO, so like engineering, programming, lots of tools development, stuff like that, which he also still did during Crashlands 2, but was constantly.
It's kind of during the downtime, because in the first like couple years, then Sam was still doing most of the biz dev stuff because he'd already had conversations going and he was finishing those up, and the art requirements at the beginning were still heavy, but they weren't nearly as heavy once we got into like full production mode. And so there was kind of that early biz dev phase of Crashlands 2 in like 2021 in particular, was kind of when I got to still have time to make a bunch of internal software for the team and do a bunch of other stuff. And 2022 was pretty slick also because we were kind of just, everybody was doing dev.
It's really
there
like
was no business to do.
6 months pre-launch up to now.
Yeah, the past year, because basically once we started doing localization, then that's when
that's when things kind of took.
That's when things started to really get like kind of intense all the time. And then that was that year. The year leading up to the full launch was just
And so I think so we've now that Crashlands 2 is out and we're kind of taking stock of where we're at and what we want to do next. Then we're shuffling some things around to give Adam some time so that he can spin up something that we're currently calling internally. It's our Gadget Works. It's a division of the studio that's meant to take all the tools and tech that we've built for ourselves and find ways to make those things available to other developers through some kind of a service.
Well, and including the stuff, because so much of the stuff that I've made for the team is like, it's like a script that lives inside of the Crashlands 2 repo that is doing kind of a general task, but it benefits from making a whole bunch of assumptions. It knows that I'm going to be the one that runs it, or a robot somewhere that I told to run it, right? So there's all this like expertise required to use even the tools that I have made, so that like
they haven't been made general because that's
and they haven't been made general even for us, right? Meaning it's like when we start the next project, it's like part of my job then becomes, okay, how do I migrate all this functionality over to this new project? Tweak it for whatever the details are here. And so this also isn't ideal for us to be in that situation. So the idea is if it's going to serve us well to generalize that stuff, make it self-service so that everybody on the team can do it. So then I don't have to be the person who's like, yeah, here's how this works. Let me go do it. Right.
It's the same idea as the Game Changer, basically.
Yeah, exactly the same.
Long form sense. It's just like making all the tools actually user friendly so that other people can use them.
Yeah. And if we're going to do it, we might as well make it available to others, you know? So.
Yeah. And this also kind of goes in line with our other goal, which is after working for 4.5, nearly 5 years on Crashlands 2, we want to get back to our roots. We're like, when we first started the studio, our first couple of games were 3-month projects, Quadrupus Rampage and Talfight 2. We made Flop Rocket very quickly and some of these like smaller games. And we love making these like smaller or mid-sized games. They're super fun to work on. They're super fun to play. The stakes are lower because like if you spend 3 months making something instead of 5 years, well, guess what? You don't have to make nearly as much money off of that game to support the studio. But there's a fixed cost here, which is launching a game requires marketing. It requires setting up store pages, potentially translation if you're going to go down that road. And then like Adam was saying, all this tech that we've built has this fixed cost of migration and setup to get this new project sort of underway. So,
and some of it's just like extremely labor intensive. Like there's like anyone who's ever interacted with the Steam backend will know that
oh my God, yeah.
There are probably 1,000 things you could do behind the scenes that you probably should do. And like knowing what all those things are is already the first challenge. And then once you do kind of figure that out, Steam has a very loosey-goosey range of experiences for like what it's like to interact with those things. In terms of like, sometimes you can like download a thing to work on as a batch and then re-upload a batch for like translation and stuff. Sometimes you can't. Even when you can, 2 different sets of information have different file formats, right? Like it's an extremely chaotic kind of a backend experience. And that's the best case scenario. The other platforms are all even harder to deal with.
Even crazier, yeah.
Yeah, so the idea is if we're going to be, there's so much room for mistakes. Nothing is streamlined. And there aren't any like good, because there are no standards. There aren't like good tools to help you just convert things back and forth and like, you know, that kind of stuff. And so having something that makes it so that we can much more robustly and quickly stand up a store page, add languages, have a checklist knowing like, oh yeah, we've covered all our bases for the things that have to happen to make sure that this works well. All of that kind of stuff is going to be extremely useful for us if we're going to have to do it more than once every 5 years.
Yeah,
you know?
a couple times a year, even. You know, because our goal is to get more games out more quickly, and I think our players would probably appreciate that, right? Which isn't to say we're going to make like throwaway games or bad games. Like we still like, even if you think back to like in the Quadrupus Rampage days, that was the second game we ever made as a studio. And it was a 3-month project. And that thing still fucking holds up. Yeah, I stand by that game. That's a good game, right? Yeah. And so if we can but like we've learned so much in the meantime, that like a 3-month project where we orient around like get this game made in 3 months nowadays would be several steps above Quadrupus Rampage, right? Yeah. And so
again, this is all slated to take place once we finish kind of all the post-launch work that we want to do for.
Yeah, we're still working on Crashlands 2, so we're kind of like ramping up to get ready for what comes after Crashlands 2. And so to facilitate all this stuff, then we're shuffling roles around so that Adam has the time to start working on these tools just full time. So I've taken the CEO role back from Adam. So I'm the captain now, but look at me. Which is, I mean, our titles are always kind of, they're not like in name only, because it is still the case that like I am taking all of this admin stuff off of Adam, and then Sam's helping me with that as well.
I think they were historically kind of a name only, because we just kind of, as a cloud,
we all just kind of did
in charge.
Everything, you know?
And then once I took over to like be like, we intentionally were like, we need somebody who basically is just taking care of this. Then that's when we kind of started to do it. Like, okay, let's make positions official, right? And so
with more well-defined roles, and the thing about the CEO role is like the goal of it is to take a lot of the decision making and decision fatigue off of other people, right? And so like if you could say like, all right, well here's something I'd like to do. I've looked into it. Here's some options. Here's what the costs would be. Here's what I suggest. What do you guys think? right? As opposed to, hey guys, should we do this? Let's all go research it and all talk about it for 2 weeks or whatever.
Yeah. I think
so it's to
that,
kind of streamline that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's that plus the having somebody who, like, we know someone's job is to be like looking ahead and being like, have we done all the things that have to happen? Are we in the process of doing all the things that have to happen?
Right.
And
that's
all
a lot
that
of
kind
work.
stuff. It's a lot. And when people have their heads down, making a game, building software, doing whatever, doing QA, whatever their main task is, then it's just extremely easy to suddenly realize, like, oh shit, we really should have. Like, this event's coming up. We really should have had a store page up already. We haven't been doing any biz dev. We let this email sit for 3 months. Like, it becomes really easy just to lose track of all that unless someone's job is to do that.
Yeah, but there's this weird kind of like I'd say like information flow problem, which like, so Adam, you were feeling this a lot when you were in this role, which is you weren't making the game, but you were responsible for the game.
Yeah.
Which is very hard.
Huge
because
communication inefficiency because I just didn't have the info I needed, or I didn't feel I never feel like I had the right to like make a decision because I was like, well, I gotta talk to the
because you're not making the game, so you have to like ask the team if this makes sense and blah blah blah. And then also like as someone working on the game, I had this kind of like general uncomfortable fog sometimes where like I'd be like, what's the dates of this thing? Like, what's our timeline? Or when do we need to have this thing by? Or when are we doing our next localization round? Because I'm not part of those conversations. I'm just programming the game. And so it kind of adds this like extra layer, like you're saying, there's a middleman now, right? Kind of thing. And so, so it makes more sense. So the way we think about it now is we've got our games division and we got our gadgets division. So Adam is now heading up the gadgets division. I've been handed the CEO role of the games division, but Sam and I are sort of co-managing the game side of things.
Co-pilots, one might say.
Yeah. And so what we're going to be doing then in the near term is we're doing some research and design on figuring out what our sort of first round of products will be through the Gadget Works and what it's going to be called, like what the service is going to be called and how that's going to all come together. We have a lot of cool ideas, but we're not going to commit to something until we have something more concrete.
Yeah, I'm starting to kind of put I've basically been doing kind of an audit process of being like, okay, what are all the problems that we've been dealing with? What are the tools that we currently have? What are the tools that we haven't bothered trying to make because we were like we only launch a game every 5 years, so we'll just absorb that horribleness once we get there. Try to figure out kind of what that list is. So we can figure out like, okay, what is the actual shape of this? And then we have I'm sure we've talked about it on the show in the past when we've getting ready for other games. But the fucking naming problem of like, how do you brand a thing and how do you name it? Because you have this, because it's got to be like punchy and good so that somebody can have fun. It's got to have a good mouth feel, it's got to be easy to say. It's got to be unique enough.
It's got to pop.
It's got to pop. It's got to be unique so that you don't have to worry about trademark infringements and so that people can disambiguate when they're talking about it. But if somebody hears it, they should be able to guess how to spell it so they can Google it, right? And the web domain should somehow match really closely so that if somebody goes like, oh, I'm going to try to go to that.com, that they probably get there, right? And there's this list of things that have to happen to get there, and that's all once you kind of know what it is. And hitting something where you like finally get it is always, every time we sit down, it's like with Rumpus, with our internal work tool, Blork. Every time we hit one of these things, we sit down for like a fucking day and we're just like jotting out ideas, trying to come up with something. And then eventually, finally, there's something we're like, yes, this is the one.
Somebody just says something weird. I'm like, there it is. That's what happened with the studio name. We were in a car for 3 hours just coming up with random shit. And eventually somebody said Butterscotch Shenanigans. We were like, oh my God. That's the one. Still nobody knows how to spell it, but Google fills in the gaps, so it's okay.
Yeah, it's any alternate spelling Google's going to guess correctly
Google
too.
Because nothing is close.
Yeah,
nothing is close to this.
Yep.
So I think in the near term, while we're still kind of figuring this out, Adam's going to be putting together, once we figure out what the name is probably, Adam's going to put together probably like a stand-in site that has a newsletter sign up or something so that we can start to get people on board with sort of pre-signing up to be alerted when this thing goes live and with more information about what's in it. And also we could potentially reach out to people to get sort of like early previews of things and get feedback about what it is that we're working on. And so it's going to be an ongoing process. And another part of the reason for this too is money. Because here's the thing: if you make a game, the game makes a bunch of money right up front, and then it's a long, ever decreasing tail of revenue, right?
And you get spikes from sales and stuff, but the spikes also get smaller, right? So it's just this ever decreasing revenue stream,
So
which
it's
is
like, all right, if
it's cooler than like, I put in an hour of work and I get an hour's worth of money back, right? So it's still like
it's scalable, which is cool. Yeah.
But
but it has that constantly declining revenue stream thing because it's an entertainment product that's meant to be consumed, right? As opposed to if we make some developer tools that developers can use throughout their development cycle or particularly around their launches and stuff like that, then that's a service that we can grow over time, and that can help to sustain the studio, which then gives us more freedom to do stuff on the game side as well. So it's kind of money is freedom, right? It's like the more diverse we have our income streams, then the less exposed we are to risk and all that stuff.
So this idea, which we talked about quite a while ago on the podcast, of anti-fragility, right? Which is, there's a lot of ways to sort of define and talk about that, but the idea is building a system that sort of assumes that chaos is going to happen and is designed to respond okay.
And importantly, when chaos happens, you become stronger as a result.
Yeah. And so kind of one way to think about an anti-fragility mechanism is to have business models that have opposing or somehow completely different ways of generating revenue, causes of revenue being generated, that kind of stuff, right? So if you have one thing that basically generates a steadily growing source of revenue, even if it's not likely to be super high, but then that basically is an ever increasing baseline. So you're constantly decreasing the risk that you're going to go out of business, right? But it's not going to make you.
It's not going to you can't have a blockbuster hit with this, right? Like we can't, like if we launch a game that really takes off, the ceiling on the amount of revenue that can generate is infinite, right? Yeah. It's crazy high. But also the floor is zero, right?
So having that combination of like slow growth stability that isn't enough by itself, probably, right? But is, again, ever increasing the floor.
It's very
and then these gambles that, like, the gambles have no ceiling, but as I said, but the floor is zero, right? Then means that you can also have more gambles, even if some of them do hit zero. Because, like, right now, with the current shape of the studio, where it's fully dependent on game launches, then if we get 2 zeros in a row,
that's pretty bad.
Yeah.
We're just toast. We can't.
If we ever get a dud, we're pretty doomed.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, if we continue spending a long time making games, which we're also trying to move away from. Yeah. So lots of interesting changes. It'll be pretty cool to see, like, a year from now where all this stuff kind of shakes out. Hopefully a year from now we have several new games in the hands of players. That'd be pretty dope. So yeah, lots of cool things coming. And then on the industry side of things, we just want to give a shout out to our buddies over at Rack 7, the makers of Sneaky Sasquatch. They got acquired by Apple. They're the first game studio acquisition Apple has ever made.
Wild.
Yeah, I think so. There was something else about, like, some game studio that Apple was working with for the Apple Vision Pro. I can't remember if that was an acquisition, but the important thing is, like, this is the first, like, small game studio that there's only 2 people. And these dudes are fucking, they're hilarious. Like, when we met them, we were chatting with them, and they showed us, like, an early version of Sneaky Sasquatch, like, way back in the day, and they were like, we were talking through a bunch of the ideas.
We saw the.
It was 2019 GDC, wasn't it? It was.
I think so.
Fucking thing. We were all just
like they were showing us some of their game ideas that they were working on, and then it kind of at the end they just booted up Sneaky Sasquatch, and they're like, yeah, we get this fucking stupid thing where, like, we don't even know what the point of it is. You're a Sasquatch, and you're just kind of like going around
doing stuff. You got
doing
like
stuff.
Poorly written checklist that you're going to go.
Yeah, and we were just cackling the whole time watching this. And so,
it was so funny.
And then that game became, like, just one of the defining games of the Apple Arcade.
Yeah.
And like, also just those guys, like, they worked remotely, but they lived like 2 blocks away from each other.
Yeah, they're so fun. They're great dudes.
They're just a couple of goofballs. So I mean,
big congrats.
Honestly, like, for a life-changing thing, like, being acquired by Apple,
by a $1 trillion company.
It couldn't happen to a better couple of dudes.
And they were already, because we talk a lot about, acquisitions and how they tend to just destroy a company and so on, right? So it's impossible to know what this actually means for them for like making future games and that kind of stuff, right? But they were already all in on Apple Arcade. So they were already basically a subsidiary of Apple. So my suspicion
they were carrying Apple Arcade on their shoulders.
Yeah. So my suspicion is that this is going to kind of like for them, it's probably going to look sort of like it already did,
Yeah, I think so.
It always depends. It always depends on
for a while
how.
Anyway.
Yeah, because acquisitions are weird because it's like at first nothing changes and then eventually everything changes in some way. Who knows? So hopefully they can continue to keep. Maybe Apple wants to like take the Sneaky Sasquatch brand and like make it into something big, which would be fucking cool.
Bring it to Apple TV. They've got that weird, that alien comic, Strange Planet.
Oh yeah,
Strange Planet.
Yeah, they have that as a show on.
Yeah, give me the Sneaky Sasquatch.
It would work.
I'd watch that
series.
That would actually work. Really well.
Honestly, yeah, it's one of these things where the concept. Because like it's kind of like the game where like the concept was like, I don't know, you're just a Sasquatch doing shit, and then you look and you're like, this is amazing. Like I want more of this. I bet a Sneaky Sasquatch show would come out the same. Where at first glance you're like, what is this fucking stupid thing? And then you're just like, when's season 2 coming? Like I need to. And then only other sort of industry news item we want to talk about is that the Switch 2 is launching on June 5th. Which is
right after this episode comes out.
It's like a day after this episode airs, so Thursday, June 5th. Just a couple interesting things about it. So for starters, we talked about the pricing, which is Switch 2 is $450. There was some question about whether they would stick to that because of the tariffs, but the tariffs are. I saw somebody run a number, and apparently the U.S. has changed its tariff policy like 53 times since this presidential term started.
Yeah, it's like
so
every day.
I think eventually Nintendo was like, I don't know, fuck it. We'll just go.
Just send it.
So it's happening, and the pre-orders, I think they turned those back on at some point after they turned them off. And there was a lot of grumbling about the price because the original Switch was $300, I think, $299. But that was a while ago. That was like 8 years ago or something like that. And
also, honestly, the hardware in it is terrible. So if we can have,
if we can get a Switch that costs more but also like can run games, that would be sick. And like trying to get like Levelhead and Crashlands optimized for the Switch was very tough because they basically had the equivalent of like a mid-range Android phone at the time it launched. So like a 2018 mid-range Android device was basically like where the Switch was. So Switch 2 will obviously be more powerful than that, probably still quite a bit weaker than most consoles and things
like a Steam Deck.
But also there's the Mario Kart World game that's coming, which Nintendo's trying to set a new anchor point at $80 for games. I think Mario Kart World is sort of like their big one that they're like pushing to try to drive that home, which I don't know. We'll see if it's worth it. They've been working on it since 2017, so it's been like an 8-year.
It's an
project.
open world Mario
it looks
Kart.
dope.
I don't quite know how those smush together, but I assume it's going to be good because they don't tend to. Nintendo doesn't tend to drop like garbage games. You know what I mean? Like they tend to do a good job with whatever the shape is, even if at the time of looking at it,
we'll worry about the new
is this?
Pokemon games, but other than that,
I think in particular for
that's not that bad.
For their like flagship console launch titles, right? They
really don't fuck around.
Really drop the ball. I think for me the problem is that I have no problem spending $80 on like a really good game, period. But like a really good Mario Kart, like hell yeah, I would pay that.
But how about $530?
Exactly, but 500
and then tax.
I think it's 500 for the bundle, right? But $500 to play that game is
a bit more of an ask.
Yeah, like no, I'm not going to do that.
So we'll see. We'll see. But if it turns out that there's a library of great games on the Switch 2, then it's then now you got to drop 500, then another 80, and then another 80, and then pretty soon you dropped $1,000 for 5 games or whatever. But
if you buy enough $80 games, then eventually that first $500 gets absorbed across all those.
Yeah, and it's possible that they're still selling it at the hardware at a loss. We don't really know because they do make their money off of the the Nintendo eShop, right? And then the other kind of interesting thing about the Switch 2 was that the games industry is volatile enough now, and with so many studios going under and studios being acquired and then shuttered and whatever, that this time around Nintendo was really, really stingy with the dev kits.
Yeah. So previously,
like, they don't want to.
You basically just send in a form, right? That hey, we're going to make a game for the Switch. Can we have a dev kit? They would kind of look over your stuff.
You still pay it. You still pay them to get the dev kit.
Yeah,
but
you pay some money and then they ship you one. It's like, it wasn't a big deal. It'd take a couple weeks, maybe, if that. And then.
And they would basically do like cursory check to make sure you're a real company and that kind of stuff, right?
Exactly.
But pretty limited.
A limited pool still, yeah. So then with this one, though, because of all these closures, they basically wanted to make sure that the dev kits they sent out wouldn't, just end up like kind of floating.
Go adrift.
Yeah. And so, because like imagine if you had like, oh yeah, our team's like 40 people, whatever. We got 2 Switch dev kits, so we can do all this stuff. And then we get closed by our large parent company because the industry is imploding. And so where do those dev kits go, right? So they basically ended up really locking it down. There's no forum, there's no nothing. So far as we understand it, basically like if you're in a known entity, whether in the indie space or the AAA space, whatever, and you know a guy at Nintendo, you have a partner account person to reach out to. That was kind of how you would get one. And even then, they'd be kind of like, well, are you really going to use this sort of, are you definitely
this is, of course,
under?
Because it's the lead up to the launch of the console, right? And so they don't want a console escaping out into the wild before it actually becomes generally available.
Especially a dev console, right?
Yeah.
Like because
where it's all unlocked.
Yeah. Dev consoles, they cost like twice as much and they have extra features and stuff and more access to things. And so yeah, the companies want to keep them pretty locked down. And they're variably intense about it. Like Xbox, you could just turn any Xbox into a dev kit. It's fucking sick. Love that. PlayStation is wild, very hard to deal with.
Much more intense.
Gotta have a static IP address that we whitelist, like all this stuff, right? So depending on the company, like the stuff can look very different, but they all have the same goal, which is to say, let's keep these out of the hands of people who haven't signed NDAs, right?
Yeah, which is still, so far the most extreme dev kit protectionism we've ever seen was the Apple Vision Pro. Where, where they
come to Cupertino. We have
you'd have to physically fly there and go to a clean room, where you could work with the thing. They wouldn't send you one. And then it launched with like 12 apps. So, hey, there might be a correlation. I don't know. Yeah. So, and that's just always that push pull between making stuff available, but keeping it private. It's very difficult.
Yeah. But I think Switch is banking on the fact that they can pull it off for Switch 2 because Switch 2 is backwards compatible, right, with Switch. Yeah. So they could basically say, well, if you've already got a Switch dev kit and you get your game working on Switch, then supposedly it'll just also work on Switch 2. And so any developers who want to have a game on Switch 2 probably also, if they can, want it on Switch 1 because it's going to be a while before Switch 2 overtakes Switch 1 in the market anyway. And so you're still better off from a numbers standpoint probably launching a game on original Switch. So
the challenge is basically the fact that because the old Switch is so just low power on the hardware, frankly, that like a lot of games that have come out in the last couple of years, you just don't want to have to invest that level of optimization work.
Yeah, Levelhead's going to be sick. On the Switch 2.
Oh, yeah.
We should look into seeing if maybe we can do like some kind of a Switch 2 launch sale for Levelhead or something, and Crashlands, something like that. We'll take a look at that and see. I don't know. That'd be pretty sick.
Well,
just if you get a Switch 2 and you're like, oh, what Butterscotch games can I get? We'll just go grab them.
Well, I think interestingly, they haven't really done anything to update the eShop so far as I understand. I think there's still some curiosity about.
They announced they're making a change to a couple of the discovery sections, but they're trying to. It's not really with the goal of making it easier to surface games. It's more to disrupt the current behavior of people just discounting their games to 99 cents to show up at the top. And first, like kind of shovelware to appear that just because a recent problem on the eShop is people publishing a collection of games that are all named. It's basically App Store shit, right? Like mobile App Store shit. It's like launching a bunch of games that have titles similar to popular games that are already out there, and then overwhelming the visibility in the market by then knocking those down to 99 cents. So that if you go try to find stuff or look at the one page you had any control over, which is going on sale, then all you see is just shit that nobody once, and there was no way to surface your own game on top of it.
What's largely interesting to me about that approach is that they're shuttering, or they're changing the shape of it to, make it not possible to game the system in this particular way, but they're not changing the shape of it in a way that actually effectively enhances discoverability for anybody, which is
because
really,
they still don't care.
I know, it's so annoying, but
because they got first party titles, they do not give a shit.
Whenever they sell an indie title, they have to give away 30% of the revenue. If they sell a first party title, 70%. They don't. They give away 70% of the revenue. They sell their own games, they keep all of it. Yeah, so the incentives are very misaligned there. And it's a problem that you don't really have as much on, Valve sells games. They have Team Fortress, but they're not actively making new games really. And so it's a weird.
They also have the correct, the outlook that they have is basically people will buy our games. Right, like Valve says, if we make a game, people are going to buy it. Right, we don't have to keep shoving. We don't have competitors. If we make a game, people will buy it. And they also understand, especially over the years of them running a store, that players fall into distinct kind of groups. Right, most players play a game or a franchise. Right, and then many players will be into a brand or whatever. Right. And so on the Valve side, they don't actually lose by making things visible to people.
No,
because
they don't. Yeah.
You just they only win because what they've discovered is that the more opportunities you give people to buy a game, the more likely it is they'll buy more games.
Yep.
And they get a cut every time, and it doesn't meaningfully compete with the stuff that they're doing. And so
they're private, so they don't need to maximize profit for some kind of shareholder.
Well, they don't, but this also does maximize profit, right?
Yeah, in the long term. Yeah, it does. Yeah. So a lot of interesting things going on with the Switch 2. So that's coming out June 5th. We'll kind of see what I'm assuming that despite everybody in the universe having their head explode because it was $450 is too expensive and blah, blah, blah. I assume it's going to sell out immediately, and everybody who complained will be the first in line to buy one.
Yeah, that seems to be the running theme. It's if you see people complaining about the price, then it's going to just sell out.
It's definitely going to sell out, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, because people would have to care enough to complain about the price.
Yep, so that's true.
Yep.
What they're complaining about is that they're sad that they're definitely going to be spending that much money on it.
Honestly. It's completely fair. It's like if you need to renovate your house and you're like, oh, this is going to cost $50,000, and you're very mad about it, but
if you were going to do it anyway, then I guess that's what you. Yeah. You wouldn't complain about the price of something that you had no interest in buying, right? Because it doesn't affect you.
Yep.
So, anyways, let's get into some questions. These questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net. Highest upvoted question comes from Challosis, who says, have you tried learning a new language as an adult? How did it go? Well, it depends. We're talking about programming languages? Or?
I think lingo languages. Real languages.
Well, I think we could also kind of hit both. It also depends on what you mean by as an adult.
Yeah, what's an adult?
Is that college?
I think the actual languages one is a very different question than a programming languages one. You know what I mean? Because there's no autocomplete when you're just talking to someone. So it's a very different.
There's no. Let me Google this real quick on Stack Overflow.
Yeah, that's all
mid conversation.
I think it's kind of because the logic of programming languages they differ a lot from each other, right? So there is a big mental overhead to move between them. I say as a person who has used a lot of languages over my history. But basically every programming language that you work with is in English. Weird English, fucked up English, right? But but it's in English. So as an English speaker, you don't have that part of a barrier to move. You recognize the symbols, you recognize the words if you don't know quite what they mean in that context, right? But that barrier is definitely lower from a just general understanding thing. And the kinds of questions you can ask are a lot simpler because things are.
I think the general point that I'm going to add is I think actual language requires responsiveness, right? It's not like when you're typing, when you're programming something, you have all day to figure out what you want to say and how you want to say it, whatever else. But the moving into a verbal component of a new language I think it's just the hardest thing because you got to be reactive, right? If you're going to have a conversation with someone,
it's embarrassing and awkward
it's hard.
As you're saying, because you like you're saying, you stumble through when you're typing in your programming language, right? But it's just you hanging out, stumbling through, right?
All the time in the world. Who cares?
Yeah, but when you're stumbling through trying to talk to, which is always my problem doing human language stuff, is like then the practice part with other people was just so embarrassing because you're just like, you start saying a thing and then it starts to fall apart and you're like, fuck, what was that?
Yeah. So I tried to pick up some Mandarin for a couple of years ago, I guess. I used Duolingo for a bit, which was, it's a fun little thing to do. And I would say it's one of those things where like, it definitely was, it was working. It was like slow progress, just like every day for a bit. And then I chat with my wife. But one of the funny things I ran into, speaking of that kind of like embarrassment thing, is I can't help but like crack jokes, right? Whatever language it's in. And so as soon as I got like the most minimal vocabulary and like could potentially crack a joke, then I just like was, but then I was causing all sorts of problems because like apparently you're not, there's ways of saying things that are not, they don't translate actually. Right.
Yeah, well, you're making a joke based on like the English translation of the thing that you're then saying in Chinese, right? It's like,
yes,
right. It's like the source is the English translation. So
you're not thinking of the joke in Chinese. You're thinking of the joke in English, and then you're like, "Ooh, I should figure out how to say this." But
it's weirder than that, right? Because it's like it's a joke. It's not actually. I assume it's not that it's actually like in English. It's that you're thinking of like the Chinese parts and how you can.
It's fun. It's fun. It's fun just like playing with it. And it was very interesting doing it, but it's not one of those things that I think as soon as I stop doing it, because unless you're in a context where you get to just sort of naturally practice it, especially on the speaking side, like speaking is the king for all this stuff, to be honest, like,
yes. Yeah.
Then if you're not in a context where you are practicing that essentially daily, then I think it's really hard to do. And you can set those up for yourself, right? But like, in my particular environment with my particular context, then it was one of those things that was just very hard to maintain doing that. Because of course for my wife, it's like, it was interesting for her for a little bit, maybe like 10, 15 minutes, but then we actually want to have a conversation about something. And so I'm still just dumb. So you can't actually converse in a meaningful way. And so you kind of run out of steam there. So
yeah, that's what I was going to say about like, I have always thought about learning a language, but when I think through the practicalities of it, I need to be in an environment where for starters, I need to learn a language that I would use, because if I don't use it, I would just lose it, right? Yes. But also if I don't use it, I won't develop it. And I'm just never in an environment, except for in very brief windows. Like when I go to India for a couple weeks at a time, people around me are speaking Marathi and they're speaking Hindi. But they're also speaking English like at least half the time.
Yeah.
And so if I did start to learn Marathi, like I could maybe like eavesdrop a little bit on some conversations. But, if I spend like 2 years learning this language so that over the course of 2 weeks, I can pick up like
an extra third,
a subset. Yeah. It's like, it's a huge investment for very little gain. And then if I don't maintain it in between those trips, then I would just
because even if the gain is that it's just fun, it's like fun and cool to know the languages. The fact that you don't get to use it means that you just can't. Right? So I did through high school I did Spanish, and then in college I did this like a immersion thing with my wife. I guess right after college for Spanish, and so that was like my kind of Spanish exposure. But I had a lot of Spanish trickling in the whole time, and we're exposed to a lot of Spanish in the U.S. Right, and so even today, like if I'm hearing Spanish, I can kind of follow, like I can because also it's like just similar enough to English that I can sort of fill in the blanks. It has the same cadence. It's like the words.
But if you try to speak it, how does that go?
If I try to speak it, it's very slow and bad if I try to speak it. But I can say it. I could say it like, quote unquote correctly, more or less presumably with a strong accent.
Slowly and awkwardly correctly.
Awkwardly, yeah. But I also took an intensive summer Chinese course in the end of college as well. Mm-hmm. And it was like, I loved it. It was so interesting because Chinese is so different from English or Spanish. English or Spanish, basically the same language in comparison. You jump across that gap into Chinese, and like the parts of speech are different, right? Like it's
all different.
It's very, very different. And like learning all the characters and that kind of stuff is super challenging. And then of course, you get instantly exposed to the nuances of language that you don't normally think about. Because like when we were learning Spanish, nobody was like, okay, we're learning Mexican Spanish, right? They were just like, oh, this is just Latin American Spanish, as if that's one thing, and it's not, right? But we weren't taught those nuances about that. And then, but like for Chinese, you're instantly like, okay, are you going to be learning simplified Chinese or traditional Chinese for the character sets? Are you trying to speak Mandarin, or are you trying to speak some like Cantonese language, or like what are you trying to do? Because there's a million languages spoken in China, right?
Well, I think it's something that Americans don't really fully appreciate until they've like dug into this, is that like the United States was settled at a time where movement was a lot easier. Yeah. Right. Like in terms of, we've got trains and highways, and like when we had our manifest destiny days, you know, in the early 1800s, you have a bunch of people who speak English all spreading across a large area, right?
It didn't take that long to go from one side to the other.
Yeah. So you can travel 2,000 miles in the US, and every stop along the way, the same language is spoken, right? But in these places that are much older, where like the currently dominant culture there is the one that was been there for a long time, when they come from a time when, you know, even like if you wanted to go from village to village, you had to just fucking walk, and it took like a week. Then the languages are incredibly fragmented. So even like in India, you know, you've got 1.2 whatever billion people there, and there's 32 something states, but each state has several distinct languages from the neighboring states. And in some cases, there'll be villages that have their own language that's distinct from every other place in the world, you know? So it's just like,
so
it's a very different, yeah. So like if you're trying to learn a new language, then just because you've learned a language that is spoken in a country, it doesn't mean you'll actually be able to travel that country and communicate with everybody. You know?
Well, this is because this is the struggle I had when I was learning Chinese, is I was learning standard Mandarin, because that's going to give you the kind of the broadest access, right? Probably. So I was learning standard Mandarin, learning simplified Chinese, and then I would be hanging out with my wife's family, but they'd be speaking in their dialect, which is
I had this too, actually,
from southern China, and which of course there's a lot of variants of that too, and like it's real fucking similar, right? But not the same. Some of the sounds are different. The tones are not always the same, like between them. And so trying to keep track of like, am I saying this wrong in Mandarin, and like that's the correct Mandarin way to say it? Or are they just saying that thing in their dialect, which is different, and being able to like tell those apart was just an enormous challenge.
That was one of the things that happened quite a bit. Like once I got that kind of bank of vocabulary, was as I would be talking about something, I'd say a word, and then I'd be like, oh, I mean, that is correct, but like that's not how you say it. You know, like, or like what you would say.
Well, because there's also colloquial, and there's also
even though it was a phrase, right? It was like a whole phrase I got from
there's slang, class. There's idioms, and also like I think it's fascinating, even just generationally. Like, and I don't know if this is accelerating or if I'm just old, but the amount of new slang that younger people have, and the pace at which new phrases pop up and new words and new whatever, like new idioms, is crazy. Yeah. You know, and so like even just because you speak a language sort of like as it's been defined, you'll hear like younger people talking in that language saying shit that nobody's ever even heard of, but they understand each other just fine.
That's again, it's that whole idea of like a language isn't a language. It's not. There's no such.
It's always evolving.
It's a very hugely diverse thing, and you can't just come into it and be like, I'm learning Chinese and have that mean anything, right?
Yeah, I would say I'm probably in a context currently, like life stage context, where it is like the most appropriately fitting for trying to do that again. Right.
Yeah, you got enough like Chinese spoken in your household. And,
exactly. I got the mother-in-law. Like it's like there is a lot of Chinese spoken near me now. So it could be a thing I do, but this is also the time where I have zero bandwidth as far as when you're like, what do you want to do with your extra 15 minutes before you go to bed?
Yeah. The reason all these Chinese speakers are in your house is because you have two very young children. Right? So you have no time. So I guess, yeah, like, long story short, like none of us have like aggressively tried learning a new language because we're just not really in a scenario where that makes sense to do or where it would be easy to maintain.
Well, but it is remarkable how you lose it, because again, like with Spanish, it's like I can hear it. And like I can't, when I speak it, it's not that much worse than it ever was. Definitely worse, right? But it's not that much worse. Because again, I think it's just so proximal to English that it's just manageable. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But for a while, I was like pretty good at, I could like look at a string of like pinyin and I didn't know what I was saying necessarily, but I could say it. I could say it correctly, right? And quickly, right?
Actually, when you were visiting, you read one of Mava's Chinese books, and my mother-in-law was like, "Wow, Adam's Chinese is so good," because he's got like very like weatherman pronunciation sort of vibes.
I can hit the tones. Yeah, like I can
good diction.
I was able to figure it out, but when I'm doing it, it's like it's so slow now to like work through it. And when we work with this this company that helps us with our like Chinese influencer marketing. And they're like, hey, can you put a video together saying like, hello, thanks for supporting us, whatever, in Chinese. Here's the Chinese, right? And I was like, yeah, I could do that. Like I've taken Chinese and I used to be pretty good at it. And, pretty good at a tiny subset of it. And so I got it and I was like, sat down to practice it. And I was like, I just couldn't fucking do it. Because there were a few syllables next to each other that like, I just couldn't.
Can't transition. It's like a tongue twister,
Yeah, I couldn't get it. And I remember being able to do this 15 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. Like I used to be able to do it without it even being a problem. And feeling like I was doing a good job. And I hadn't actually tried to for a long time. When I said I do that, I was like, ooh boy, I lost. And I've also I used to know so many of the characters, that I would still like, I would see them like on the TV and be like, oh yeah, I know I can like recognize enough of that I can, there's the gist, right? And over time that kind of decayed to the point where one of the most common characters that you ever see, especially when you're learning Chinese, is the one for thank you, right? And I saw that on something and I was like, what is that? Like just completely zero memory of it, So yeah, that stuff decays so fast if you don't use it.
It's tough. Yeah. And as an interesting side note, something that I was learning about a while back was this weird moment in time where your language development gets like pretty hard locked in, where there's all these examples of pairs of siblings that are a few years apart that move to a new country. And usually the age marker is about 15 years old, where if you move to a new country, you have to learn a new language. Before that point, you won't have an accent. Mm-hmm. But if you move there after that point, you will. And so you'll have these two siblings who both moved to a country at the same time and have been speaking the language for the same amount of time. But one of them just can't pronounce certain syllables and the other one can. And it's always like there's this sudden point in time where your brain is like, all right, good enough. We're done with languages.
There's moving on. There's a bunch of these weird developmental phases where, you learn about this in psychology, where it's like with kids, there's these they call them critical windows, right? Where it's like, there's certain kinds of skills that your brain is just like fully sort of plasticized to be able to take advantage of. And language is one of the big early ones where it's like, I mean, you teach a kid, like a 3-year-old Spanish or something like that. And they can get it way faster than it feels like it should be possible, and definitely would be possible for you even sometimes.
Yeah, because all they're doing is learning new languages.
It's
everything
like their whole brain
is
just it's shaped. Yeah. Their brain is shaped in such a way that it's just able to better receive that, if that makes sense, right? And then that shape changes over time, and it gets a little more challenging.
Yeah, don't miss that window, because
I think it's basically the difference
between
can't
like, get it back.
The reality is like, as an adult, if you're very practiced in it, I mean, you've seen some of these people who can learn a new language in a very short time. If you're very practiced in it, you can do it. But what's interesting about it is it's sort of the difference between like almost like, instinctual learning versus effortful learning, right? That's kind of that's the shift.
Yeah. Do you have a knack for it, or is it like you got to,
or even like is it the critical window in your biology where it's just like easy to do, right? You just absorb it passively, or is it sort of thing where as you get older, you actually have to try, or you have to have a method. You have to know how to acquire the language versus just like hanging out with people talking it and just hoovering it up out of the air.
But I think it's also because since language is how we think, at least to some extent, right? I think it's not just the fact that like when it's earlier, it's a lot easier. It's that it sort of establishes how you think, right? As you, so if you basically like us,
you see this too, like people, depending on when someone learns a language, it lives in different parts of the brain. You can see it activate Like if you do fMRI on someone's brain, you could see regions of the
so
brain.
it's like, is it built in or is it moving through a
Exactly.
mediation layer?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So if you, like us, basically were raised just speaking exactly one language or being exposed to exactly one language, right? Then to get access to another language, we basically have to go through we have to go through a cognitive thinking layer, right? To to get over there. And I think of it, I guess kind of like programming language, it's the same kind of idea. It's like if you're exposed to, and that's why if you're an English speaker exposed to Spanish as a young adult or adult, okay, it's just not that different, right? And so the cognitive process isn't insurmountable, right? If you've never been exposed to like very different languages, and they get exposed to something that's like, again, where the grammar is different, the parts of speech are different, so that all the stuff that you've been like, you're basically raised and your brain works in a way of like, this is just how language works, right? And then you're like, oh shit, language works in a lot of ways, and they're so unnatural to how your brain has spent decades, like fine tuning itself. That the amount of, it's just like the reasoning layer. Cause that's what I found when I was taking Chinese. I got pretty fast at like trying to put a thing together to say, right. Or trying to parse stuff that I was hearing, but I was nowhere close to getting outside of the whole internal translation layer, right. Where I'm like,
yeah, that would take a while.
Like there's nowhere, like not even, there wasn't even a bit of that where I didn't, and it
Every
seemed
single
like it was a long
time you
ways
have to
off.
translate it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. We got time for one more question, which is a pretty brief one because we already know the answer. That's from ButterMilkLoveNugget, who says, do you guys think you'll ever do a VR game?
No.
How crazy would it be if Crashlands had a VR version?
That'd be crazy.
That would be crazy because
totally
it would be a
crazy.
completely different game.
Or it'd be like what the Apple Vision Pro team told us to do, which is just put it in front of you
just
and
cast
play
it.
like normal, Yep.
Or we could just not do that.
Yeah.
People could just play it on their iPad, which is the same.
I think
think
there are some. Okay.
The jump right to VR rather than to just like because for it to be VR and good, it's got to be a 3D space.
Yeah,
somehow.
that's true.
And so we would have just skipped a 3D version of Crashlands.
Just go right into VR.
And go right into VR.
There's multiple layers of crazy associated with that, I guess.
That's what I'm saying. It would be crazy. Yeah. So, and we've talked a lot during the heyday of VR around like 2017 when everybody's like, it's finally time. And we were like, no, it's not actually.
Yep.
We went to GDC and every new indie studio we talked to at GDC in 2017 was like, we're making a VR game, or more specifically, we're making a VR horror game. And that didn't really go anywhere
Pay that
because,
for most people.
as we've always said, people generally dislike having a big fucking thing strapped to their head.
Yep.
And they dislike spending $500 to $5,000 to do it. So
Yep. And people generally don't have the space available that's necessary for it. I mean, there's basically like one thing that I would really like to do for VR, which is I'm actually subscribed to the sim racing and flight sim subreddits just as like a fascination of like people have these fucking rigs, okay? Like chairs with pneumatics in them and stuff, and they've got all the shifters that exactly match like the layout of how it is on the screen.
Cockpit, basically.
They have a cockpit and they've got throttles and joysticks and dials and dashboards and stuff to the point where like it basically is VR in the sense that you cannot fucking tell that you're not in an airplane.
Well, a cockpit is
driving
perfect
a race car
because
because a chair is part of the environment.
Yeah. I think that's like the key to it is like if the chair is part of the environment, then that's really hard to have a good experience.
Yeah. So I'm more interested in doing something like that because like you for like probably $3,000 or $4,000, which is like the cost of like an Apple Vision Pro, you could build one of these sim station, like a battle station, which I don't have that kind of money to just throw into something like that, which is why for now I just observe it through, watching other people's cool shit. But that's like
watch them play Star Citizen or whatever.
Yeah. Like there's certain games where it's like, man, that would be so fucking cool. And admittedly, like trying to play a racing game, even just with like an Xbox controller or something, is really not that satisfying.
No.
Like back in the day, we had a PlayStation 2 in like 2002 or whatever. And we had this little steering wheel thing.
Yeah. I remember.
And I played the fuck out of Gran Turismo.
Yeah.
Like I played so much Gran Turismo.
It is very different when you just like throw that steering wheel over, you know, you just, it's like
yeah.
the corner or something.
I can also compare that to the Wii's steering wheel. Remember that thing that you just plug the controller into the back of?
You just put the Wiimote in.
And then you just hold it in the air. It doesn't. It's not right.
That's
not so right. It needs to be a steering wheel.
It needs to be heavy.
And you need pedals.
Yeah.
You need pedals. So like that's the kind of thing that I think is cool. But again, like the market for that to me is the same as the market for VR, which is extremely niche. Like almost nobody has the space or the money to do it. And so if you're making games that are exclusively targeted at that audience, I mean, you got to capture 100% of the market to make any kind of a
that market is small. It's also kind of the annoying thing about games pricing and how the markets work relative to each other, right? Because in most kinds of markets, if you make a niche product for like a wealthy audience, right, then you charge a lot for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you do that because you can't sell very many of them. And so you need to sell them at a higher price to break even at least, right? And VR is exactly that. VR, there's almost nobody, statistically speaking, has a VR setup. And even if they do, they're not buying a lot of VR games, right? But those people also, if they own a VR setup, they probably have disposable income, right? But they're not willing to pay more they're not going to
spend $200 on a game.
Yeah, they still behave like a normal gamer. They're like, "Oh, games should be free or $5 or whatever." Right?
They will spend $2,000 on in-app purchases within the game.
Yeah, and they'll spend $5,000 on their rig, right? But they won't actually spend enough money on the actual gameplay experience to like just to buy it.
Yeah,
for it to be worth any
divergence.
Well, it's because the reality is like if you're hooked up to if you're using one of these VR headsets or whatever else, as long as it's not fully self-contained, which I think there's only a few of those, then you have to be jacked into a computer that can. But one is running Steam or something, and then two is powerful enough to run the like VR game, which is more computational
at 90 FPS,
which means that your VR game is still competing actually with every other game on the market for someone's attention, right? Because
you're playing it through a peripheral.
Exactly. They're playing through a peripheral on a machine that can run everything else. So it's like, do I want to play Baldur's Gate 3 or the VR thing? And I think that's where the reality is like the experience of VR is its own thing. It's a very unique thing. So it has that leg up, but also it's as much of a curse as it is a blessing because it's like you said, not every day you want to strap something on your face, be blind, in a 10-foot cell in your house by, alone. Like it's sort of a very
that's just Tuesdays.
Yeah. And then when you do, you don't want to pay for the premium given that you're a niche market, right? And so that's why there's almost no VR games, right?
Yeah.
Because
this is also funny. Like if you think about like the Apple Vision Pro, it's a $3,500 like minimum, right? And then there were like extra add-ons you could get or something. But if you made a game for Apple Vision Pro, you could not charge more than $10 for that fucking game because it would be an iOS game at the end of the day, basically. And people who use Apple products are unwilling to spend more than $10 on games. That's just what it is up front. Once they have the game, they'll spend $10,000. But that's not really the business model that we use. So, so no VR from us. You will not get VR from us. Probably ever.
I don't think ever.
I'm gonna say
it would
probably
only happen if we became so successful from a blockbuster hit that we thought it would be fun to do just for fun,
if we did it,
there's like 1,000 other things that I would rather do for fun before I hit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Once we run out of all the other things that we now get to do for fun because we have infinite money, then we'll do the VR.
The VR game that I would make for fun, and when I say for fun, I mean basically as a joke, would be first-person flop rocket VR. Okay, so you can still only move in 2 dimensions. And you're still going through a hallway tunnel-like cave, and you can only see out the window from the inside of the rocket. Okay, so it would be impossible. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So it would basically be impossible to go more than probably. Yeah. Basically, I would just make it just as a joke to make people throw up. Somebody would still beat it, I'm sure, but.
It's going to be those Kerbal Space Program players who like fly without looking at or they fly using like the in-cockpit instruments and looking out the window.
I've done that.
Yeah.
Like I did a whole moon mission without ever leaving cockpit view. From inside.
That's the target audience for Flop Rocket in VR, I think.
It was fucking awesome.
All 12 of those people.
All 12 of them.
Yeah. So I don't know. VR, I don't know what people are doing.
Well, I think this is
there is a market there. It's just a small market.
It is, yeah.
It's like there are some studios who are successful at it, right? But it's like it's just a small market. So it's like, when you're asking the question, especially as the industry's gotten more insane the last like couple of years, of like, okay, we have limited money. How do we invest our resources? And it's like, do you invest them in such a way where you can own even if you block bust this thing, your max is X. And if you don't block bust, it's like the chances of you recouping your money are low. Or do you go with like just the rest of the market where frankly you can sell on multiple platforms? Like it's a really hard sell from
I mean, these days the only
reason
devs I hear from who are actively making VR stuff and have been successful at it have funding from like Meta or something.
Oftentimes, yeah.
Yeah, because I think you just can't sell enough units to offset any kind of a significant dev cost. Because it's also like solo devs and tiny teams who don't have to recoup as much.
What do you guys think about the new, like, so there's all the AR glasses that are coming out? They're already out, I guess, now. But like, like the Ray-Bans and ones and whatever else that are doing all that screen work on the lenses themselves.
Yeah.
I assume there's going to be some games for that, but I don't know.
They're so computationally limited. I don't think.
Yeah.
Because they're going to have to talk to the cloud to actually accomplish anything, which means you're going to have built in, minimum 100 millisecond lag to anything that you do. So I think it's going to be very limited as a games platform.
I just don't want Facebook looking through my eyes. You know what I mean? That just freaks me out.
Yeah, it's just a data. It's the same as an Amazon Echo. It's a data harvesting tool more than anything. So but also like, this is, as a game developer, this is kind of a weird statement, but like people need to spend less fucking time on screens. And I think strapping one directly in front of your eyeball at all times is the wrong direction, Like,
what do you need to see all the time?
But importantly, like, what does it do to social interaction? Like, if you're talking to somebody and that they have a camera that's recording everything you say whenever they look at you, and that you don't really know what like data they're pulling up about you. Are they looking at your social media posts while they're talking to you?
Or are they even paying attention? I mean, we've had that even when the Apple Watch
came out. They're probably not even paying attention.
Apple Watch was so annoying when it came out, and like there's tons of now because like people have the messages showing up on their wrists. So you'd be chatting with someone and they'd be like, they just like read a message that just came in. This is like the first year or two, and people were still, etiquette was just like out the fucking window about it. But yeah, I don't know. There's so many studies.
You can't talk to people without them just looking away at other shit all the time,
weird.
So now, what's going to happen when somebody's directly looking at you, you still don't know whether they're actually looking at you. Like, just fuck that. Just can we?
Well, and while they're looking at you,
can we not do this?
Facebook
looking at
OpenAI is looking at you.
Yeah. No thanks.
No thank
Hard
you.
pass.
Yeah. So no, I'm good. I'm good on that. Anyways, that's all the time we have for this week's episode. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa Acosta for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate to support the podcast, and links to the archives. And if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam, the App Store, and Google Play, and purchase Crashlands too. It'll help support the studio and help keep us going. And if you've already bought it, give it a thumbs up. Give it a good review on those platforms. Yeah. That helps a lot as well. So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.